So in talking about data sets, we often describe certain terms in those data sets by measures of their central tendency. Big three, mean, median, and mode, those are commonly referred to as the central tendency, although within that conversation they also talk about a range. The mean and the median typically talk about descriptions of things within the middle of the data. The mode can pretty much be anywhere, and the range is described by its definition as a difference between 2 points, and we'll talk about that later. So when we talk about the mean, that's the average of the data set. All right, sometimes it's referred to as the symbol mu. Looks like that. And to find the average, I'm sure you've done this throughout your mathematics career. You take and add all the numbers and divide by the number of numbers. So in this case, if we have this data set and we want to find the average, we add them all up. So I'll just put a plus sign between all this. And then we divide by the total number of numbers. And in this case, we know, whoops, there's not 6, there's 7 numbers. And then find that number, and that's going to be our, which in this case is 80. Now, like I said, typically data sets are described by some of these measures of central tendency, and we say the average of the numbers in this data set is 80. So you would think when people talk about the average number of things in a set or the average number of people, they're talking about something relatively in the middle. Well, if you look at 80, 80 is not necessarily like dead in the middle of these 7 numbers, because this set of numbers is kind of skewed, if you will, by these values of 90 and 98, which heavily weights that average. So I wouldn't necessarily say that 80 is a good representation as the middle of that data set, because that 90 and that 98 have such a large influence on the rest of the data. All right. And other times there are other measures of central tendency that better describe the middle of that data set. The median happens to be one of those values. Now the median describes basically the exact middle of that data set. So basically if you arrange the numbers in numerical order, smallest to largest, that median is the number dead center in the middle. So if we have an odd data set and we want to find the middle number, we have to find the number such that there are an equal amount of numbers on both sides. So we have 7 numbers in this case. So there should be 3 numbers on both sides of the middle, which makes our median 29. And that describes the middle of that data set. Now, is that a good descriptor for this set of data? Is it in the middle? Sure, it's in the middle. Does it describe the data pretty accurately? Probably, I would think, because there's this 55 hanging over here, that would increase the average. So I would imagine the average is somewhere around 32. So 29 is probably the best descriptor of the middle of the data. That's not always the case as the best descriptor of the data, but it varies on a case-to-case basis, and we'll see some as we go through our homeworks and other examples. So we want to find the median of this data set. The problem is in this data set we have 10 numbers, or an even number of numbers. So if I were to take the number dead center in the middle, I got a problem, because I have 5 numbers to one side of the middle and 5 numbers to the other side of the middle. In a case like this, what we want to do is we want to take those 2 butting up middle numbers, all right, the 0.256 and the 0.276, and we want to find their average. Since there's only 2 numbers, I add them up and divide those by, and we end up with 0.266, and that's our median. Now you'll notice with the average and the median, it's possible that the average is actually in the data set it's possible that the median is in the data set as a specific number. However, many times the average won't be part of the data set, and there are times also, especially when we've got those even set of numbers, that there will not be a median value that is in the data set itself. Finding the mode is basically finding the number that most frequently occurs. Now, if you have a large data set of, I don't know, let's say 50 numbers, it's probably going to be not difficult, but it will be more difficult to sort that out if it's not arranged numerically and you have to look for how many times a certain number occurs. What we have here is we have a stem and leaf, and in a stem and leaf it's really pretty easy to tell how many of each specific number there are. So in this case we see that there's 2 number 40s, and in this case we see that there's 3 55s. If the mode's described by the most frequently occurring number, then that's going to be 55 because it occurs 3 times. When we talk about the range, we're talking about the difference between the highest number and the lowest number in the data set. So again, we've got a stem and leaf. We can find the low number, which is the smallest number, and we can find the highest number here. So if I take the difference of those two, 59 and 35, we end up with 24, and that's our range, which describes basically how spread out that data set is. So from the high to the low, there's 24 numbers. So it's not typically a wide range of numbers.